Hi, I'm John DeDakis, and you're one to one with me, and I'm one to one with the author Jeffrey James Higgins. There he is there. Let me just make sure that you can see his name nice and pronounced. Let me just tell you a quick bit about Jeff before we go on. He is a former reporter and a retired supervisory special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. He writes thrillers, short stories, creative nonfiction, and essays. Jeff has wrestled a suicide bomber. I don't know the story, but I definitely want to ask him about it. He's also fought the Taliban in combat and chased terrorists across 5 continents. He's written 2 novels so far, Furious and Unseen, and they've won numerous literary awards. Hi, Jeff. I'm glad that we're having a chance to talk.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I always love talking to you.
Thank you. We met last fall at the C3 conference. It's the Creatures, Crimes, and Creativity conference that author Austin Camacho founded. And you attended one of my workshops, and we were on a panel together. And I just read your first novel called Furious. Let me just make sure I can show it there. And what's interesting about that, it's hard to tell initially until you look closely at it. You can see those two scary eyes there. And the basic premise of the book is it's told from the point of view of a brilliant female surgeon who is grieving the loss of her infant, of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. And it's 6 months after the death, and she is still grieving intensely. And she's married to another doctor who is trying to get her to snap out of her grief. And so he rents a luxury sailboat, and they are going to sail the high seas for about 1,000 miles as a way to just get away from it all and help her move on with her life. Of course, the trick is that she's also afraid of the water. So what could possibly go wrong? Um, and the interesting thing is, of course, you know what's going to go wrong. There are going to be storms and sharks and probably friction in the marriage. But there is something that happens at the midpoint, and I'm not going to give it away, that is totally unexpected. You did a good job of planting the seed, but then it sprouts in the middle of the book, and that just the pacing just takes off. I mean, I teach people how to write novels, and this is textbook how to do it. So tell me a little bit more about the creative process in terms of, I mean, obviously you've got a storied career as a agent, and we're going to talk about that. But writing fiction, that's a whole different thing because you've got a just the facts, ma'am, journalism background. So writing fiction, how difficult was it to make that transition?
It's a transition. Like I've always considered myself a writer. So when I was a kid, like I think like most authors, you always have that urge to tell stories. I was making stories when I was 5 and 6 and 7 years old and drawing on cardboard and using construction paper to make covers. And so my whole life I knew I wanted to do that. Then I sort of took a right turn after college. After my journalism degree, I worked as a reporter for a little bit, and then I took this strange turn into law enforcement, which ended up being 25 years in law enforcement, which was really, it's a noble profession, and I'm really proud of the work I did there. But I retired in 2017, and I've been writing full time since then. So it's really exciting to get back to doing what I'm passionate about. I work every day. My wife's always telling me, "You haven't taken a day off in 5 years," but it's not, it doesn't feel like work, like, I mean, it's hard. It's obviously very hard, but when it's something you love, when it's your passion, it's what I want to do. Like I would rather be writing and creating a first draft of a story, which is my favorite part, than doing anything else. Like to me, I just love story. I get excited when I read books. I get excited when I go to the movies. I get excited when people have great stories to tell. It's such a human thing, and it just drives me. It energizes me.
Now, obviously, writers are supposed to write what they know. And so I want to hear, let's just talk about this. I want to hear the story about you wrestling a suicide bomber. I don't know if this shows up in any of your work so far, but I would imagine that, everything that you've done in the past has in some way informed your fiction. So please tell me the suicide bomber story.
You know, when I started after I was a reporter and I started writing my first novel, like all young writers do. And I remember thinking I was like probably 22 or something, and I'm trying to write about like this crime fiction. I'm thinking, you know, I get all my information from like from the news or from movies, and I just wanted some. I was like, this would be so much better if I had some real life experience, you know. So then when I got into law enforcement, I had 25 years of real life experience. I've been in a lot of shootings. You know, I've fought for my life. I've done all these kinds of things. And so that definitely instructs my writing. Like I'm able to write violent encounters with a lot of authenticity. And I think readers, or at least I get from their comments, that they get the realism in it, because, you know, it's one thing to see shootings on TV, or be in combat. It's another thing to do it and then write it. So I went to I was with DA, but by the way, I'm libertarian, so I kind of believe that most drugs should be legalized, you know, which is an odd thing for a DEA agent. But yeah, anyhow, after 9/11, I was at the World Trade Center on 9/11. I was one of the first three people. We were walking together we were the first people to reach the North Tower after it collapsed. And I was standing there in the rubble, you know, with F-14s or F-15s flying right over the river in this gaping hole in the sky where those towers stood. And I swore, I took a vow right then that I would use my investigative abilities and DEA's really proactive and effective techniques to go after terrorism. So after 9/11, I volunteered for our new office. We had this nation office in Kabul. And so it was myself and one other full-time agent and three or four temporary agents. People would come and go for 90 days at a time. And I got there and I was on my fourth day, and one of these temporary agents had a source who told him that a terror cell that was working with the Taliban and the Haqqani network, a terror cell that had recently killed a bunch of people at the Kabul International Airport, that they were going to give an IED, an improvised explosive device, to a suicide bomber. So he set up a meeting, and I was so excited. I was 4 days in, like, this is what I want to do, you know? So I was like, let's go out there and get him. And he set it up so that International Security Assistance Forces, that was the coalition forces, had a quick reaction force. So he'd spot it, and then we called him in. And that day, this is like my fourth day there, the drug czar showed up in Afghanistan. So I was the assistant country attaché, and the country attaché, we had to go to this intelligence agency and brief the drug czar. So I missed this meeting, but luckily it all fell apart. And so the next day, my partner and I went out, and we were the intelligence element for this coalition reaction force. So our goal was, we had the source. One of our sources was going to be meeting with members of this terror cell. And when they arrived in downtown Kabul with this explosive device, this bomb, we were going to call in the coalition forces, and they'd make the arrest. And, you know, as you probably know, all plans fall apart upon first contact, right? So like we were prepared. We knew things would go wrong, but our source was meeting with these guys in a tea house. And he called it in that they were in this tea house. And we had a translator in the car, and one source on the ground, and another source with the bad guys. And through this miscommunication, we called in the strike team, and they came across Kabul, and they hit the tea house, and they took everybody into custody, everybody except the suicide bomber who was no longer there. So we didn't know what to do. So my partner and I grabbed the source, threw him in the car, and raced across town trying to track this guy down. And we found him in front of the Blue Mosque, this big mosque behind the stadium, right in downtown Kabul. And we were following him, and we called in the military. It was a Norwegian team to come and execute the arrest, but they couldn't turn around their convoy. They were on the other side of the river. It was just, you know, Kabul is very congested, and they weren't able to get there. So we just followed him, hoping we wouldn't get burned, you know, because he was carrying this bomb. I've got pictures of him with this bomb swinging in a bag, swinging by his side. And we saw he entered this big square, and the suicide bomber was getting ready to board a crowded bus. And so my partner and I were just like, we want permission to arrest him. And the military's like, no, you don't have permission, stand down. And we just looked at each other and we're like, let's go. And so the two of us jumped out of this car. The Marine who was driving it was like, hey, you know, and we took off and ran across, and we tackled the guy, and we ended up fighting for him. And while we were fighting with him, he kept trying to reach into his pocket, and he had a detonator for the bomb that was lying next to us. And so my partner was choking him unconscious, and I had my gun out. I was thinking of shooting him at one point because we just couldn't control him. And when I pulled out my gun, with a crowd of Afghans around us went crazy, because here's two Westerners wrestling some guy on the ground. And they were throwing bottles at us, and they were coming closer and closer. So the Dutch had a Apache helicopter that they hovered right over us, they were blowing sewage water in our face and everything, but it cleared the crowd back. And we ended up wrestling, I mean, for a long time. It was like 12 or 15 minutes, which if anyone's been in a fight, you know that like even 30 seconds is a long time. So eventually the Norwegian crew came and they took custody of the guy. We recovered, I think, 3.5 pounds of plastic explosives and ball bearings in this bomb. And they took him into custody. Then we used our source with the Norwegians, and we led them across Kabul that night, and we hit the terror cell's headquarters, and they recovered all kinds of explosive materials and RPGs and bombs and that kind of thing. And I think they arrested at least a dozen, maybe 18 terrorists. It was at least a dozen terrorists that night. So it was fun. That was day 4 in Kabul.
It was fun. Okay.
So I'm thinking, how am I going to top that?
I know it's downhill from here, folks.
That's right.
What year was that?
That was 2004. It was April 2004.
And is it entirely likely that he would have set off the bomb in the bus?
Probably. I mean, they were going to kill somebody, so I don't know if they would have done it in the bus. They were freaked out because they saw the military presence in the area, so that could have been why they went to the bus. So we just didn't know. Was he going to detonate? I don't know. But eventually, I mean, they killed a number of people just months before. I think in December or January, they killed a bunch of people at the airport.
One of the things I talk about in my writing classes is fear. And of course, fear is one of those things that exaggerates, and you can be afraid it can be daunting just to hit send when you're trying to query an agent for the first time. That can be just as terrifying as wrestling a suicide bomber. So here's my question. You have obviously faced fear and maintain, I mean, that's the definition of courage is fear in action. And so help me understand your philosophy of how you've faced fear. I mean, what are the takeaways in life regarding that strong emotion?
Oh, that's an easy question, John. Just in a few minutes, could you
Yeah.
please explain the philosophy of life? And
Right.
But no, I mean, you're right, right? Fear comes, there's all types of fear, and there's fear of medical problems, right? There's fear of losing people you love. Oh, by the way, there's this great literary agent, Donald Moss. I don't know if your viewers know him, but he's written a bunch of books on writing. He's a really brilliant literary agent. And I watched one of his talks, and he talked about that and the fear and how there's that superficial fear, your character's about to get shot or whatever, but then what's the next thing they're afraid of? Oh, losing their job or being crippled. And he's like, keep writing these down. And he gets you down to like the 7th or 8th thing they're afraid of, which always ends up being like, wow, my kids will be orphaned, or something like that. And that's the real, like, deep-seated fear, like I will cease to exist, or, and that's the thing that everybody can connect to. So like as a writer, the deeper fears are obviously the more than getting shot at, because a lot of times people can't actually relate to that. But I think to answer your question, I think all fear is, it's doing something when you're afraid, when you're taking a risk. Something bad can happen, and it could be you could lose your life. It could be that you're embarrassed, right? It's whatever that fear is, but then doing it anyhow. That's what courage is. And everybody's scared, right? I mean, I'm a little scared of heights. We used to do helo-borne operations in the mountains, and I was in a helicopter where I was hanging on to one of our translators while he was flapping in the wind, and he almost fell out of it because he didn't have a safety harness on. I almost fell off a mountain once. I was sliding down the sheer face side of a mountain. So those are scary moments, but you have to. I think that it helps to understand why you're doing something. So like when I'm in Afghanistan, I was fulfilling a vow to the thousands of people who were killed in this country. And I was there to protect them. I was there to fight the bad guys. So it was scary, but I was hunting, right? That's what I was doing. I was going after the people who were trying to kill us.
And it's a cause that's bigger than yourself.
It is. I don't know that it even has to be, but yes, that certainly was, right? But you could say that that's a bigger, more altruistic, I'm trying to protect society that I'm a part of or whatever. But it could be something like with your writing. You just know you want to publish something. It's your destiny. It's what this is your calling to write. So maybe it's a little scary getting rejected all the time, which all writers do all the time, right? There's a tremendous amount of rejection. So that's scary. But if you want to do it, then you go ahead and you battle through the fear and do it. And I think that's the same thing. If you're doing something for the right reasons, and then something's terrifying for you, you'll fight through it. If you're not committed to it, maybe you don't.
And we're really talking about two different situations, because the things that you've just recounted those are sort of things that you just do instinctively. There's no time to think and weigh the pros and cons. You just dive in and do it. Whereas as a writer, you can overthink it. You can think yourself into, cowardice and paralysis, just being paralyzed. So let's make that transition to let's talk a little bit more about writing. Take us back to when you were writing Furious. How difficult was it to write your very first novel and to find an agent and to get published?
It's a really difficult business. I sometimes people contact me on LinkedIn, like former agents or police officers, and they're like, I have this great story. And by the way, they always do. Like they always have a really compelling plot. But I'm always kind of caught between discouraging them, but also giving them the facts, and the point is, there's something like one out of every 10,000 books that gets written actually gets published traditionally. It's incredibly hard to find an agent. It's incredibly hard to find a publisher. Even when you do, it's incredibly hard to make any money from it. So you
Right.
really have to just write because you want to write. Like I put up Facebook ads, which I pay for myself. I have a publisher and they do a lot of work, but the Facebook ads I handle. And one of the things that I like the most is it gives me this instant feedback when readers will write things on the Facebook. So when I'm feeling really discouraged or when I'm feeling a little dejected, I go pull up the Facebook ads and I read the reader comments, and it keeps me going. It's like the fact that someone's reading something I wrote and they're enjoying it and they get that it's a fun story, that means everything to me. So if that's why you're writing, because you want people to read the stories you have in your head, then if you make money or something else works out, great. If not, it doesn't matter because people are reading your stories.
How much did Furious evolve from first draft to final publication? How many drafts did it go through? And what would you say were some of the significant improvements that happened over time?
So I wrote a book, my second book that was published, Unseen. It's a crime novel. I actually wrote the first draft of that. And then I pivoted off that and wrote Furious. So Furious was for my first book published, but the second book that I wrote. But it was still early, right? I'm still learning the business. I've been doing this full time for almost 5 years now. And so my editing process is I just get the first draft on paper, because if you're starting to write something, or if you keep going back and making corrections, you'll never get out of the first chapter. It takes forever. So there's something really important, especially with pacing, to get your entire story from the beginning to the end, get all three acts on paper. And it doesn't matter how bad it is, because that original draft, you're the only one who's going to see it. Another human being will not see that until you say, okay, now it's good enough. So I found that's really helpful. I generally write the first draft in 5 or 6 weeks, so I can get through it pretty quickly. Or I've done 3 books for NaNoWriMo, which is the National Novel Writing Month, and I've hit like 70, 80, 90,000 words, somewhere in that area, for each of the books during that month.
How much time do you spend writing a day?
It varies. When I'm doing a first draft, I usually go to word count. So I try to write a minimum of 2,000 words a day, which, might take me 3 or 4 hours. Depends on how good it is and how my muse is working.
Right. There's
But
also the law of diminishing returns too. The longer you
yeah,
spend, sometimes you're not getting anywhere. You're just spinning your wheels.
yeah, your brain actually uses more calories, I believe, than any other organ in your body. So when you're sitting there, I'm just sitting at a desk typing, whatever. But when you're thinking and you're trying to balance character arcs and plot arcs and all this, in the way you're expressing things, and I mean, there's a million things going on in your head when you're writing. When you're doing all that simultaneously, it's exhausting. So the goal is, first just get it on paper, then I have a draft, and now I can work with it. Right now I actually have something I can mold and fix. For Furious, I would say I edited it at least 40 times. It might have been closer to 60, but it was one of my earlier books. I just finished a book which is out to beta readers now in my critique group, and that was 5 revisions. So my original writing's getting better, doesn't take as much. But
But
I
as I but
go
as
ahead.
I understand what you're saying, your process is pretty much writing. Well, you like to kind of know where you're going with it, and then do you write it straight through for the first draft, and then go back and make it better? Is that pretty much the process?
Yeah, so I'm an outliner, so, like, I have to know what the high concept plot is. It has to be something in a line or 2, so I know the story. I know where it begins and where it ends, and I at least know the tent poles. They're in the middle. There's in thrillers, there's depending on which expert you're talking to, there's about 15 beats that have to be in the book, 15 like key moments in the story, like an inciting incident, in the midpoint when someone's fully committed or there's a change in what they're doing. There's 15 of these. So I try to know all of those. So I try to, and it can change as I write. But if I have a pretty solid outline, I also have to know the character. Is the characters, what the character's seeking, right? That's your plot, your protagonist. What is it they want? But also, what is it they really need? So what's that internal character change that needs to take place? So they're going for one thing, but there has to be a change in the person. If the person doesn't change, it's kind of a flat story. So I know that going in. I have an idea what the characters are, and I'll polish them later, but so going in, I know the major, I know the plot arc, I have an outline, I have the character arc, and then I write and I go from start to finish. I just want to get through it because it's hard, right? Writing is hard. And so that takes me a month of that. And then a couple weeks of adding, doing like a structural edit and adding other scenes and taking some out. Sometimes I'll combine characters because I realize I have too many characters, or one person could do what two people are doing. So I make sure that works. I do a structural edit. Then after the structural edit, I'll go through and I'll look at I'll usually do like a big craft edit, meaning I'll just read the whole thing from start to finish to make sure the pacing is good, to make sure things are fitting in 3 acts, that I don't have to move scenes around, which I usually do, or that I'll delete scenes. And then as I'm doing that first big edit, I'm also changing language, I'm better prose, better descriptions. And then I'll do a character edit and make sure the character arcs, because it's every character that you have has to have some kind of arc. Make sure your antagonist actually has like believable goals that are genuine in their own mind. Make sure people's backstories are there, but there's not too much backstory to slow the pace, that kind of thing. And then I'll go back and it's fixing the dialogue, making sure that each person sounds so unique that you could listen to them and know who's talking without a tag. A character tag on them. And then I just go through however many craft edits it takes, where I start,
It sounds like you're going macro to micro.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and this is why I know people who will start writing and then they'll try to polish that first chapter. And you might end up throwing out the whole first chapter. I've done that several times where I've been like, this is a great chapter and it's interesting and I think the writing's decent, but the book needs to start 4 days later, which, the closer you start to the real action, the better. Obviously, you don't want to waste people's time. So yeah, I don't do any polishing. And by the way, when you do that, when you just get through the story, it makes it so easy to cut a scene because even though you might like the scene, it was your first draft. The writing's terrible, right? So it's not this beautiful thing that you've labored over for 50 hours or something and then cutting it so painful. So yeah, structure first and then kind of work your way down. And then the last one I do is a paper edit. So I print it out and I read it on white paper. And this is when I think, oh, I really got this. This thing is polished. And then I read it and I make probably 20 changes a page. Like when there's something neurologically, and this is a real thing, neurologically, your mind processes the words differently when it's on white paper. I don't know the science behind it, but I know it's real. And so I always do that. Sometimes I'll even read it out loud, depending, especially the dialogue. I'll almost always read the dialogue towards the end out loud to get that rhythm for it. And then I use software before this goes to an agent or a publisher. I use Pro Writing Aid, which gives you like 15 reports. It analyzes what you have. And, it's a computer. So some of what it's doing is wrong, but most of it's pretty good. And then I'll get that. So I have something that's fairly polished, and then it'll go out to beta readers who will give me feedback. Then it'll go out to my critique group for specific opening or, whatever chapters I'm giving them. And when I go through all that, then I feel confident sending it to like an industry professional.
Right. Let me ask you this about characters. You write, I loved Furious, and the protagonist, Dagny, is a young woman. And I write as a woman as well. And of course, I've got a certain philosophy and the way I approach it. But of course, I'm a guy, you're a guy. What business do we have writing women? And yet the women in my life have told me that I get it. And I'm sure that has happened with you as well in the feedback you get. Philosophically, and just in terms of the craft, how do you go about being able to write a woman as authentically as you do?
I think you use the same tools that you use to write any character, right? None of my characters are me. That's not true. I have a nonfiction book about some of my own experiences, which is out to publishers right now. But what you're doing is you're creating another character. So it's harder when it's the opposite gender. I mean, men and women are different. I know this might sound shocking in 2021, but our brains are different. We think differently. We have different reactions to things. So, it's harder to write somebody. It's hard to write somebody of a different race, right? It's hard to write somebody from a different country. It's hard to write somebody from a different, like socioeconomic class. Like if it's not your exact experience, then you have to go out and get that experience. So I mean, I've been fortunate with like my jobs and with having a kind of a diverse group of friends, that I have people in all these different areas. So I've spent time with people from different walks of life. So it's easier for me to write. With women, it's men and women are different, but both are amazing and both bring different things to the table. Sometimes it's the same things. My female characters tend to be very analytical, very rational. I like that. I like my wife is my inspiration. She's the most courageous woman I've ever met. She formed the first secular pro-Western political party in the history of modern Egypt. And she's on Al Qaeda hit lists, and, and she had to flee the country and seek asylum. Like she's a very brave person. So definitely a lot of my strong female characters are based on her and on other strong women in my life.
Was she a beta reader for Furious?
She is my first reader for everything, which is great because she definitely catches things that I should fix. in one of my books, she caught the name of the killer very early on in the book that had slipped during an editing process. But yeah, no, she's a reader. She's a writer too. She has a book coming out about the Muslim Brotherhood called The Secret Apparatus with Post Hill Press. I think it's September 6th is her publication date. But she's an accomplished author. She's written books in Arabic. She's had books banned in the Middle East when she was there. So she's a great first reader. But these characters, these strong female characters, like I've written a female character before, and she read it and she said, seems kind of flat, doesn't seem like a woman, seems a little, and I was like, oh, you're absolutely right. So that's terrific, feedback. And now my readers seem to think that my female characters are authentic, which is, I'm very complimented by that.
Now, I was telling a friend of mine, a woman, about your book, and I set it up basically the way I did earlier about this woman who's afraid of the water and grieving, and she goes on this long sail, and my friend said, why would she do that? I mean, that's going to be, when she reads the book, she wants to know why that woman agrees to go on this dangerous thing. Now, obviously, your wife, who's a strong woman, has read this, green lighted it. Did you have to struggle with making the decision of your protagonist to get on the boat? Did you have to change anything in order to make it more authentic?
No, because in my outlining, I gave her the proper motivations, right? So she's spent her whole life dreaming of becoming a doctor, and she's finally at this period where she's a surgeon and her life is coming together, and then she loses this child. This is all before the book begins. And she's so depressed and she's so despondent, she can't function. So she's literally at the point where she's contemplating suicide, and she has to do something. So her husband offers to take her on this trip, and she has this fear of water from something that happened in her past. And she decides maybe she needs to be shaken up like this. Maybe he's having her confront this fear. Maybe confronting your own fear is a way to distract you from these other issues that you have. But she had to do something. So there's an element of desperation. The other piece of it is, and I find this interesting when people, I've heard a couple people made that comment, but a lot of people get it too. It's the way people approach things, right? There are different personalities and different epistemology. And some people will look at something like a fear of the water, which can be debilitating, right? You have a phobia from a childhood incident or whatever. And some people look at that and just avoid it. And other people feel compelled to take it on. They feel compelled to conquer it. And it's just a personality difference, but she certainly has that. She's type A. She's she's confident. And so taking on and defeating a childhood fear is something that she wants to do, because that's the kind of person she is. And my wife and other people I know are like that as well.
So why is it going to be a movie? Where do we stand in that? Because it's very visual.
I hope so. Yeah, I write visually, maybe because I love the movies. That could be part of it. But I'm writing the script right now, and that's a whole different thing. I'm lucky. One of the guys in my critique group, Adam Meyer, is a really talented script writer. He does a bunch of television movies, and he's been giving me some advice, and I've read some books. I've got a bunch of books right behind me on screenwriting and Save the Cat and the Screenwriter's Bible and all these books, because it is very, very different. You know,
What's the most difficult part about making that adaptation from something as lengthy as a book length manuscript, translating that to the screen, which has to be so much shorter?
yeah, truncating it obviously is a big deal. What surprised me when I first started doing this was I was like, oh, I can take, I can limit the scenes and I'll combine scenes and whatever. And I'll just use little pieces, and you don't have to do it. There's no internal monologue. I'm not using a voiceover like that because it's a thriller and I want to keep people in the moment. So I was like, oh, this will be easy. But what I realized, when you format the proper way, and I use Final Draft, which is screenwriting software. When you format the proper way, there's like no words on a page. There's this little section in the center for dialogue, and like you can get through like a third of a page in your novel is at least like one page. So yeah, it's very few words, but you also, because it's visual, you can say things like, you just describe what the actor should be doing, and you don't have to use flowery language. You're just giving direction to the actor, and then there's the dialogue, and in the way the actor will bring out the emotion. So you don't have to get into all that in the script. So it's a little easier in that respect. It's also much shorter, right? The script's like between 90 and like 110 pages, and the books. I mean, this book was only 252 pages, but there's a lot more information in the book, so it's different. But it is visual, and I've had so many. I mean, I have dozens and dozens of readers say they're hoping this will become a movie. And I was contacted by a producer out of the blue who showed some interest in it. So my goal is to get this script written this month, and then get it out to some producers and try to get some feedback.
Excellent. Talk a little bit more about writing groups. I get asked about this a lot, and at least in my experience, some of the people I've talked with say that, at least from what I've heard, a writing group can be very good, but it can also be, in a sense, it can short circuit your creativity, in the sense that if you haven't really thought your project all the way through, you can be driven and tossed by everybody else's opinions. So in your experience, um, beta readers are different than writing groups, or the same, or how would you compare the experience that you're getting in terms of the feedback, the relatively objective feedback that you're getting from people who are seeing your work fresh?
That's a great question. Let's unpack it a little bit because there was a lot in that. I
Yeah.
think that whenever I really recommend this for writers, by the way. There's something magical that happens when you're thinking about a plot. Stories in your head, characters are in your head. Sometimes you'll wake up in the morning with an idea. I go for a long walk every day or a run, and during that run, my synapses connect better because I'm in motion. And ideas come to me, so I have to run with a phone so I can leave myself notes. I have a thing called Aqua Notes in the shower, which is it's a pencil and waterproof paper, so I can take notes, because when you get that moment of relaxation in the shower, things just pop into your head. So it's really, people say the muse, right? It's a magical kind of thing, how the stories are actually created. So what I have learned through the hard way is, really don't talk about stories until you've written them down, and then before you show anybody your work, make sure it's ready, because you don't want to waste their time, right? So make sure it's fairly polished. Even if it's a beta reader or somebody early on. I don't like even bouncing plot ideas off of people, because hearing a different idea might change the way I'm thinking about it. Or, in my head, maybe I'm not describing something well, but in my head, I know the mood, the theme, the feelings that I want the reader to have. And if someone else starts making suggestions and getting involved at that stage, I think it can really screw it up. So my first thing would be, write your book. You know what you want to say it. And then once it's on paper, now you can start getting outside feedback. And outside feedback is critical, right? So like, I think you'd be crazy to send a manuscript to an agent or to a publisher without having lots of outside feedback. The key is knowing what feedback is good and what isn't. And so you mentioned beta groups and critique groups. My critique group are a bunch of really talented authors. The Royal Writers Secret Society, maybe the best name ever for a critique group.
Right.
And there's people in there with best-selling books. It's a really some talented writers, and everyone writes a slightly different. They're all thrillers, but they're different subgenres. So that's fun. Someone's writing a cozy, someone's writing a traditional, a mystery. Other people are writing more horror. Like, so but it's all thriller. Those people give me, like, I'll send chapters. We usually do, a few every month. So they'll do it. Like, I just sent out 7 chapters of a new book. So they'll do like the first 30 whatever pages, and they will give me the writer's view on craft, on pacing, on, really important things, because those initial pages are what an editor or an agent will look at. And in fact, they often don't get through the first page. So you got to grab them and you got to hold them. And if those first 5 pages are good, they'll start paying attention to what you're doing. But if you don't have them in those first pages, you're done. So that's what my critique group is for. It's like, really give me the writer's perspective. Where have I gone off the rails here? And similarly, when I'm critiquing their work, that's when I find I really learn. Like when a story's been in your head, you've created a story out of whole cloth. Let's take a moment to think about how amazing that is, right? like all these books you're reading, this they did not exist in the world until some author thought them up, right? Or some screenwriter thought them up. It's really cool. But you're just pulling us out of the air. So you're so close to it. You knew what you wanted to say. You had the scene in your head, but maybe when you wrote it, it wasn't as clear as you thought. That's what a writing group is for. But now when you critique their stuff, it just jumps out at you, right? Like, when I started, I made tons of amateur mistakes. Like that first 6 months, a year, I was, and I was reading, I probably read 6 craft books a year.
What would you consider to be an amateur mistake?
Oh my God, there's a million of them, and I made every single one of them. I'm proud to say that I would read a craft book and go, yep, doing that, yep. So like, I mean, like in dialogue, for instance, using characters' names, John. Yes, John, like back and forth like that. Nobody talks like that, but people do it in writing all the time, or like just staying in dialogue, like info dumping, where, well, John, you and I attended the C3 conference earlier this year. And, like, you don't say that because we both know that, like things like that. Those are very, those are easy. Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? The pleasantries, cut all that crap out. So those are, just examples, but there's millions of them. Like I've created these giant editing lists, especially when I was at the beginning, because you have to know this stuff. Now I don't need to go back to the list because I've internalized it, but it was really helpful for the first couple of years of writing. So when I see it and when I pick up somebody else's, I just go through and I edit it, and it just jumps out at me. Glaring stuff jumps out at me. Too much background, they go into, or too early. You shouldn't have background early or too much of it. A line or two is about all a reader really needs to get a feeling for it. And at the beginning, I'd write like 2 pages of flashback and all this stuff, and you try to get away from that. So that's what the critique group is for. Then the beta readers are different. I have a dozen beta readers, and a couple of them are authors, like published authors, but most of them are just avid readers. And that's what I want. I want people who read this stuff. A couple of them don't even read thrillers, but they'll do it for me. And that's kind of interesting too, when they're used to a different genre. But readers in specific genres have expectations. So it's really important for your beta readers that they understand the genre you're writing in. So I'll get that for the book was boring. Tell me where you put it down. Tell me where you stopped reading that night. Tell me where you got bored. Tell me a character you don't like and why, that kind of thing. Just reader stuff. And that's super, super helpful. And so I make a lot of edits based on my critique group. Then I make a lot of edits. And this is a polished thing that I've given them that I've been through many, many times, right? And I get it from the beta readers, and I make a lot more edits. One word of caution is, do not make every edit that somebody mentions, because a lot of times they're wrong. And the only one who can tell if they're wrong is you. So if somebody critiques your writing and they say, this was too slow, or I didn't like this here, or whatever, consider it, like really look at it. But if it doesn't feel right what they're saying, ignore it, because in the end, it's your name on the book. And what I found is, with like a critique group or beta readers, if multiple people have the same problem, they're probably right. If 3 or 4 beta readers say, like, I didn't understand this, or this motivation doesn't make sense, or whatever, then I probably need to fix it. Maybe it's just like a line where I need to just clarify something a little bit, or maybe I need to pull something out or make a more major change. But just be careful, because I'll send pages to my critique group and I'll get completely conflicting opinions. Like, I loved all the detail in the scene. Oh, you got to cut the detail out of the scene, like that kind of thing, So obviously one of them's wrong, And so in the end, you have to do what you think is right. Sometimes I'll split the baby, and trim it back a little bit. But in the end, so that's tough, especially when you're first beginning, because you're trying to get your own voice and you're trying to understand what works and what doesn't.
So talk now about the process of getting an agent, and did you flirt at all with the idea of self-publishing? Because now the pathway to publishing is really wide open. I mean, you don't have to go the agent route. It's possible to get your book up on Amazon today. It'll suck, but it's up there because chances are you got impatient and didn't go through all of the machinations that you've gone through. So how did you approach the whole agent search versus self-publishing?
So I've done both. So I consider myself a hybrid author. I've self-published a short story, and just recently, Amazon has this thing called Vella, to serial stories like the old Dickens, episodic, and you have to get tokens and pay for them, whatever. So I just said, hey, that might be fun because it's a new thing. It's serial stories are huge around the world. There are all these services, and there's a bunch like Wattpad and Radish, and they're kind of heavy in romance and fantasy in those areas, but they're bigger. It's billions of dollars around the world. So when Amazon said they were going to do it locally, in domestically, I was like, oh, that'll be fun. Let me try that. So I put up a quick story, 17 episodes. It's like 170 pages, right? And a bunch of people said, love the story, but would like to see that in a book, in an ebook form. So I just recently, like a week ago, published this ebook to novella. So it's 170 pages. So I've done both. So I can talk about both of those things. I think they're both interesting. I think if you are self-publishing, I think it's really important not to do it because you're just not having luck finding an agent, or you're not having luck finding a publisher. Because if you're not, it could be the writing, right? It might be close, but just not ready yet. And I think most of the stuff that's self-published is pretty bad. I mean, and a lot of times the story is fantastic. A lot of times a person has a voice, but it's just not polished. Like I've read stuff that's self-published. I was like, oh my God, I wish I knew this guy. I wish I was in a writing group with this guy, because I could have given him like 5 tips to make this amazing. Like just because it's stuff that all writers know, like that are in craft books. That's why like getting the outside opinion is so important. But if you are going to self-publish, I really recommend, hiring an editor. Your cover design is hugely important. It's like 20-something% of people pick a book based on the cover. It has to tell them the theme, and they have to know what it's about. It has to be intriguing, something they want to look at. So, you can spend $200 or $300 or $500 or $100, but spend the money to get a really good cover design from somebody who knows how to design covers, because it's a whole science with like the feel, the moods of different colors, for example, and how things interact. And I don't know any of that stuff. So if you're going to self-publish, I recommend doing that. But your original question, I did get an agent. I have kind of an unusual story. The very first thing I wrote, it was a nonfiction proposal about narco-terrorism. I did the first ever narco-terrorism case. It set the precedent. It was a precedent. It was the first narco-terrorism case under U.S. law. And so it's an interesting story. And so I wrote a proposal for that, and I sent out, query letters to agents. Used 1-page query. We talk about yourself in the book, and I had tons of immediate excitement about it, which is very rare, as I later found out. So it's a bad way to enter, right? I had a bunch of agents wanting exclusivity, and so I ended up going with an agent who was really interested, and I liked him, and whatever. And he sent it out to a bunch of people, and we got a lot of really good response back from Big 5 publishers, saying about the writing was good and the story's amazing, but too close to something else we're publishing, or it deals with Afghanistan and terrorism isn't selling as well right now, or kind of these extraneous things. So he sent it to like a dozen places maybe, and then it didn't sell, and then he lost interest, so I ended up leaving that agent. And which was, by the way, that's a big decision when you're a young author, and you have an agent this guy has like best-selling authors in his stable. He's a real, it's a big agency and a big agent. To leave him was a big decision for me, but I didn't feel like, he'd lost interest in the project, and I had other things I didn't feel like we were connecting on. So I left him. And then I went out, and for my first 2 books, I went directly to, I queried a bunch of agents, had a lot of full manuscript requests, had some excitement about it, didn't end up landing with an agent. And I just got so tired of the process. At some point, just getting in the game is important, So I queried, I think a dozen small to mid-sized publishers, and Black Rose Writing made an offer. I think I had 4 offers, or 4 interests. We're very interested in this title type of thing. And so I went with Black Rose. They have great covers, by the way. Here we go. that's the crime thriller. But they do great covers. But I went with them, and then right after I signed the contract, right, and there's the other one. Right after I signed the contract, a HarperCollins imprint told me they were interested. And I was like, oh, there's a bigger publisher. You know, that would have been nice. But you know, it's a business you learn. I think there's something to be said for going through the whole process. I'm still learning. It's almost 5 years in, and you know, I'm still learning. You have to learn about the business. You have to learn about editing. You have to learn about, you know, marketing. You have to learn about the craft of writing. I mean, there's so much. It is so complicated. You know, and I often tell people, if you want to learn, just start reading craft books, start listening to podcasts like yours. You know, there's a ton of great writing podcasts, and just start, you know, paying attention to this and then applying it, which is why I would make my own notes on editing, you know, and editing ideas, because it's easy to forget and there's so much there.
One of the things that I think a lot of people are surprised about who are wannabe writers is that they're stunned when they realize they need to do the marketing. And of course, a lot of authors are shy or introverts. And so the concept of promotion is just antithetical to their psyche. So how have you approached marketing? You know, what have you learned along the way? What mistakes have you made? And, you know, how important as part of your writing regimen is marketing? Another one of those unpack this now, please questions.
Yeah, there's another hour show for you, right? I mean, it's really important. And even if you're with a big five, you still have to do a lot of marketing yourself. The marketing actually starts when you're trying to sell your manuscript to an agent, right? That's a one-page query. And there's a book by Catherine Sands, something like how to pitch an agent or something like that. But it's Catherine Sands. It's really good. And in that book, she talks about the book, the hook, the book, and the cook. So it's a 3-paragraph, 1-page query letter. The hook, in one sentence, you have to explain. In it's like, think of a movie log line, right? You have to, police chief scared of the water, has to track down a shark, and that kind of thing, right? It's something that people immediately get what the central conflict is and who the character is. Yeah, so you have to have that, and then you have to tell them what the book is about in 1 paragraph without giving away the ending. It's like back jacket copy, gets them intrigued with it. And then the last paragraph is you. If you have writing credits, you definitely want to put them there. If you have another platform to reach people, especially if you're writing a book if you're writing a medical thriller and you're a doctor, you would put that kind of thing in there. So it's 3 paragraphs. That's where your marketing really begins. And it's important, and it takes forever, and you can't shortchange it, because what I found is if that's not good, if people don't get the high concept of your book, no one's going to be interested. And the reason I mention this, John, is because even when you do this, everyone is going to use that query letter for the rest of the life of the book. So the agent will use it to sell it to publishers. Then the publisher will use it to sell it to their marketing people, who really make a lot of decisions on what books they acquire. Then the marketing people will use it to sell it to bookstores. Bookstores, or people, if you're trying to sell it as a movie, will use it. So getting that, what is your book about, in like 25 words or less, is critical. 1 sentence, what's your book about? And what I've found is, and I just did another novel, and I did that line first before I even started. And I'm about on January 1st, I start a new novel with a bunch of writers. We're all going to try to write a novel in the month of January. And that is my first step. I'm picking between ideas that I have right now. But if I can't tell you what the movie's or the book's about in one line, I'm not going to write it. Because if that's not exciting, no agent's going to want it, no publisher is going to want it, and readers won't want to pick it up. It has to be an interesting story. So that gets you into it. So anyhow, the marketing, I'm sorry if I'm just jabbering here.
Well, no, but you're talking about the first step of marketing, and that's getting an agent, or at least getting readers. I mean, it's that hook. It's getting them, but let's now advance it to it's out there. But that's not, the job doesn't stop there. The publisher is not going to pay for your cross-country book tour unless you're John Grisham and you don't need the publicity. So was this a surprise to you that you had to also be the main point person on letting people know about your book?
Everything was a surprise to me. When you're starting, like, really, it takes a lot of time to learn the business. So even I used to spend about half my day. So I write for about 4 hours in the morning. Then I would listen to podcasts when I was running or taking a walk. And then I was always reading a craft book at some point, and I'm reading, there's great websites out there. So you have to learn not just the craft of writing, but you have to learn the business of writing. And it's really important, because if you send something to an agent or you do something that's not acceptable in the culture of publishing, you're just going to kill your chances for people acquiring your book, whether it's an agent or a publisher. But once you have the publisher wants to know that you can help get this book out there. I mean, there's something like 2.5 million ISBNs a year, right, that are issued. The ISBN's a unique number on a book. There are so many new books that are coming out, and there's so many digital books with like Amazon has an ASIN for digital books. You're talking about millions and millions and millions of books that are coming out a year. So it's a very crowded marketplace. So your publisher, like Black Rose Writing, they do some marketing for me. I'll get notes like, hey, here's a link, submit your thing for this discount at this various promotional place, and we'll pay for it, or they'll do Amazon ads for me, that kind of thing, which is great. But you have to get out there. So you have to do things like this, right? You do podcasts, you let people know that your book is out there. You be a part of the community, which is huge. Just getting out there and promoting other people's work and being supportive of other people definitely comes back. When you're helpful for somebody, they will also help you when it's your turn, when you have something out there. But what I found is there's a lot of ways, and I've tried everything because I'm brand new to this and I'm not a marketer, but I've read a lot of marketing now and taking courses and all this kind of thing. So I have a handle on it, but I'm not an expert. But I tried things like, for Furious, it takes place on a yacht. So I tried national sailing magazines. I did some ads in those, thinking, oh, people who are sailors would like this kind of book. They did terribly. So basically what I found is digital ads work okay. It depends on where they are. But if people can see your book and go, well, that line sounds interesting, and click on it and get right to a sale page on Barnes & Noble or Amazon or whatever, that tends to work. If they're looking at a print copy and they say, oh, that looks interesting, then they have to get out their phone and log in and find, it might work for other people. It did not work for me at all. So I was in several big national magazines for sailing, but then also my publisher put me in some for writing. There were just big famous magazines that have been out there forever. I didn't see any bump in sales. Maybe it was there, maybe it wasn't. Here's what works. So when you're self-published, you can do your own Amazon ads, and I've done that for my short story and my novella. So you can, or just for the short story, I did it. So you can put your own Amazon ads out there. My publisher does it for my books, and they're paying for themselves, so they're working. They're bringing in readers. BookBub is another place where you can do ads, and you can do that. Like, as an author, I can just do that. So I can use my cover, or I have a designer. I have Sarah Burr with Books to Bundles. I'm going to give her a plug because she's fantastic. She's my designer. So I'll email her and say, hey, here's a line I want to use, like a sales copy line, and here's an image, and could you do something with it? And she'll put together this fantastic ad and get back to me within 24 hours, often within a few hours, with something she's created. That's really helpful, because your ad has to catch your eye, has to draw you in. She's done motion. I did a video, and she actually read the script that I wrote for it. So it's really cool. But so you can do that. BookBub has it. BookBub, I've had some initial success. Like, when I put up an ad, I found that people, I get a lot of clicks, right? So you have the impressions. You're paying for impressions. Sometimes you can pay for clicks. So the impression is how many people saw this on their screen when they were at whatever venue they're at. And then clicks are when they actually, use the mouse and clicked on your ad. And then there's the sell through. How many are you actually selling? So if you're self-published, you see all the data. Like, Amazon will have it. You can pull it up through KDP, and you can see, this is how many, I have Kindle Unlimited where people can read pages for free. This is how many they've read each day. I can see how many books they bought, whether they're hardcover or paperback or digital. But when you have a publisher, the publisher has all that information. Black Rose Writing was pretty helpful at the beginning, and they shared a lot of that initial stuff with me when I was trying some new marketing things. But a workaround, and this is here's a pro tip, a workaround for authors when you're traditionally published is your Amazon rating. So if I put up an ad, you can hourly, the ratings are adjusted on Amazon. So you have where you are out of all books, where you are out of digital books. Each version, each format's different, but also there's subcategories. So you can see where you are in movement. So if I put up an ad and all of a sudden I go from 170 down to number 30 I know that thing's working. It depends on how small the category is. Some categories are very small, so it doesn't mean much. Maybe you sold 10 copies. Other categories are very big, which means you probably sold 80 copies, to make a jump like that. So I know when my ads are working, and the thing by far that's been the most effective for me are Facebook ads. In each, what I would recommend to authors is pick one and kind of figure it out, and then move on and do another one. Which is why
This this seems like it's such a time suck, and it takes you away from your writing.
Yeah, it is. But it is. It's horrible. I don't know any writer who wants to do any of this. I mean, it's fun when it works, right? Oh, hey, we did this ad, and all of a sudden your book's selling it. That's fun. But I mean, think about this. You could do nothing, but do you want your family to read it, or do you want other people to read it? Because you have to let people know the book is out there. So what I do is, here's my goal. I don't reach this every day, but I get up in the morning, I drink a ton of coffee, and then that first 4 hours is for writing. So when I'm doing a rough draft, I'm very strict, or first draft, I'm very strict on this. I shut the door, music goes on, no one can bother me. 4 hours of writing. When I'm editing, I'm a little looser with it. Then in the afternoon, I do like marketing things and, promotional things. And I work on that stuff. I'm always studying the craft or whatever. So I work on that too. So you have to carve some time out. If you're just doing one thing, like BookBub, for instance, when you're finding the audience, is all about getting people who are reading other authors that would be interested in getting your book, right? So other thriller authors, that when someone looks at BookBub and they get their book, you want them to see your ad. Amazon is all about keywords. So it's all about getting people who are searching for various things to get to them. And then Facebook is mostly about crafting the audience. So you're going after interests and things that people are doing, to narrow who you're seeing, because you want, if you're paying for impressions, if 20,000 people are going to see this ad, I want those 20,000 to be likely buyers, because if they're not, I'm just paying for people who have no interest in my ad. And what you can do is you can tell by click rates. So, like Facebook's very good about saying, okay, you had this many impressions in a day, this many people clicked on it. Then I have to look at Amazon to see if my rankings are improving, to know if people are actually buying the book. So that would be the sell-through piece. It's a little harder. I have to do it one step away. But Facebook is the thing that's worked best for me. And I think a lot of people are on there. I've tried video ads. I've tried moving ads. I've tried, I'll do A/B tests where I use like the same picture but different copy, or I'll try the same copy with different pictures, and I'll give it a couple of days. But if you're not getting like at least a 3% click rate, the ad's probably not paying off. I generally get, between 5 and 6% on a lot of the ads that I know are working, and that's a pretty good click rate.
Let me ask you this. Tell me a little bit of what's your hook for Unseen, which is your second novel. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I probably had a chance, but I haven't taken it yet. But
I should probably have that memorized, but since I wrote it like 3 years ago, it's a little foggy. But it's well,
read it right off the dust jacket.
Oh, is it? Rookie homicide detective Malky Wolf investigates a string of murders in Washington, D.C., and uncovers both a vigilante killer and a terrorist conspiracy, making himself a target. And there was more to it. I like this meets that. I like those, kind of. I can't remember what I used for that either. It's terrible. It's been a while, but I always do that, right? Like, like for instance, the book I'm writing, the book that I just finished that's out to beta readers now, is a techno thriller. And I use it's Altered Carbon meets Man on Fire, because it deals with artificial intelligence, and it deals with family issues and somebody trying to find a killer, so I find those are really helpful. Like, I think Furious was, one of my beta readers said this to me. He said, "Oh, it's The Shining on a boat." Now there's no supernatural element to my book, but it's like that. It's a closed set with a woman in danger, so it kind of has that feel to it.
Okay. Well, listen, let me go back to your website is jeffreyjameshiggins.com, and people can contact you through that. They can probably buy your books if they go there as well. They can also get in touch with you directly if they have questions about writing. Jeffrey at jeffreyjameshiggins.com. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye, or at least to be continued?
Well, if you're a reader, I would love to hear your comments. If you see the Facebook ad and want to leave a comment on it, or an Amazon review, those are really helpful because it helps other people find what you're doing. I think Furious has over 520 reviews, and most of those are 4 and 5 stars, so it's doing pretty well. If you're a writer, I would just say, you know what? You're a writer the day you sit down and start writing. So do that. Think out your
Exactly.
story, just start writing, because it's like the Malcolm Gladwell is, it takes 10,000 hours of anything to become an expert. It really does. It takes like a million words. So, just start writing, and don't censor yourself. And then once you've finished and you're reading stuff, you can share it with a couple trusted people, and I'd be happy to make comments for you too. So if you want, share a
Wow.
couple pages with somebody, and get comments. But just if you're a writer, start writing.
Wonderful. This has been so much fun. I'm John DeDakis, and that's how you get in touch with me, johndedakis.com. We've been talking with Jeffrey James Higgins, who is the author of Furious and Unseen and more on the way. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. You're always a lot of fun to talk to, and this is a great podcast, by the way.
Thank you. To be continued, sir.